Hi, I'm Joe White, the High Speed Rodeo on Substack. And that is Tu Lee, my podcasting partner in crime here of Sino Auto Insights. And joining us today is Alan Ohnsman, senior editor at Forbes. He has been around the auto industry a long, long time, almost as long as me, maybe longer. And so we're going to talk about a lot of things today, and we're, especially Tesla, but maybe some other things as well. And as always, none of what we say should be taken as investment advice. I would say, especially these days, but always. Alan, welcome. So we know you, but introduce yourselves a little bit to our listeners, and then we're going to jump into the world of Tesla. But tell us a little bit about what you're doing, what you've been doing.
Alan Ohnsman.
Besides being in a band, what do you do during the day?
Besides being in a really cool band that actually makes records, but go ahead.
Alan Ohnsman, senior editor for future mobility at Forbes. And my beat basically for the last decade has been advanced transportation of all stripes, electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, high-speed rail. It's really expanded the last couple years into clean energy and clean tech, because if you're writing about EVs, then you're writing about batteries. If you're writing about batteries, it's like, well, they're connected to the grid and materials and mining and metals and all sorts of things. So over time, everything is sort of connected. And it leads you to China. That's right. That's absolutely right.
Right.
And going back a bit, I've been at Forbes for a decade now. Prior to that, I spent 15 years at Bloomberg, where I covered mostly the Asian auto industry for Bloomberg. But I have the distinction, for good or for ill, of creating the Elon Musk beat and Tesla beat in 2006 at Bloomberg, in an era when Elon was just seen as this goofy rich guy who'd made a lot of money selling his financial company to eBay, PayPal. He was part of the original PayPal mafia. And so it began with their very first public event, July of 2006, was my first introduction to Musk and Tesla. So this marks year 20 of the Elon grind, and I could never have anticipated 2 decades ago where things would end up.
So in 2006, Tesla was still a baby. Was likely going. Likely going to go out of business. We know that he wasn't an original founder.
That's correct.
But he wrote a check, and so maybe we start there. And
let's not. We don't have to start all the way back in 2006.
No. But I think that's an interesting story, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
It kind of sets the table.
Interestingly, just prior to Tesla's public coming out party, there was a movie called Who Killed the Electric Car? This documentary by Chris Payne that came out. And it was all about the story of the EV1 from General Motors. I mean, GM really was ahead of the curve with that vehicle. And it was about this passionate group of owners who didn't want to give their cars up. And they really wanted GM to stick with this program. It was created by, the current president, Mark Royce's dad, who oversaw the EV1 project. And anyway, the documentary was about the rise and fall of this very early iteration of an EV market, which was created by the California ZEV mandate in the late 90s. And the last one on the market was the GM EV1. And it actually was, at that time, the technology was fairly impressive. At the end of that documentary, Chris kind of revealed this company that was coming called Tesla. And literally weeks later, Tesla then had their very first public event showing off the Roadster, which was a modified Lotus Elise with their own battery pack in it. And that event, Elon was not the star. Martin Eberhard was far more the voice of the company at that point. Martin was one of the 3 original founders. Elon was, as Joe pointed out, the guy that wrote a check and got them up and running. I mean, to be fair, he made it real with his money. Had he never gotten involved, it's not clear if they would have gotten off the ground. But at that event, I have very clear memories of meeting Martin, talking to him for a long time, J.B. Straubel, who was designing the battery and motor system. And then they encouraged me to go talk to this other guy, the chairman, who had written the check, Elon Musk. And it wasn't the most interesting interview. I mean, Elon, if you've never spent time with him, has, some personal quirks. So he wasn't quite as media savvy in that era. He wasn't that talkative. And people had warned me that, he's not the easiest interview. So anyway, you set the scene there. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was governor of California at the time, showed up, and that became the whole party. It was all about Arnold at that point. So That was my starting point with.
I remember encountering Tesla around about that time, actually probably a couple years later, when they were struggling to kind of get the Roadster, they figure out all these problems to the Roadster, the transmission didn't work and all this sort of, and I guess my takeaway from that, which in hindsight maybe is not such a great takeaway, but my takeaway was, okay, these folks are going to struggle with kind of car company problems. And that turned out not to be their issue for a while.
Yeah.
But, and I think I want to bring us around now to a little bit more of the present day. And Alan, a piece you just wrote, that now they kind of are struggling with car company problems in the sense of declining demand for the products, old product competitors, who were kind of blitzing them on all sides. Talk about how you see them right now, and particularly sort of where you see, there's some things that are going on at Tesla that are good, but that aren't about cars, right?
Let me stop you both right there, because I'm going to tell you my Silicon Valley angle, because I was living and working in Silicon Valley at that time, and I was working at Apple. And if you worked in operations or supply chain at Apple or one of these tech companies, you had the stripes in order to go to any company, because a friend of mine once said, you don't work for Apple or Google or these companies, Meta, you work for Silicon Valley. And then you just transfer jobs in different companies. And so I'd gotten a recruiter contact me and ask me if I wanted to join the sourcing team at Tesla in like 2007 or something like that. And I was like, they were in San Carlos. Remember that, Alan?
Yes.
They were in San Carlos.
They were literally a garage operation at that point. Yeah.
That's where I saw them.
Yes.
Those were the days. But go ahead, too.
I was curious enough because of my automotive background that I drove through that San Carlos address, and I was like, oh my God. Because me being from Detroit, I'm thinking, okay, huge factory. I'm just thinking and picturing things a lot differently. And I did not take that interview. I would have left anyways, probably because of how crazy the company was. But that's kind of my claim to fame. And then, lo and behold, we see a couple Roadsters on the road in the coming years. And then I'll let you take over from that point. One thing I will point out is that my thought, and this has kind of come full circle, is that it's a bunch of tech guys trying to build a car. Early days when I was thinking, and it wasn't until the Ford, I think he was the VP of finance that became the CFO, when they started bringing in car guys, that you really saw the maturity come into play with Tesla. And I think they needed that. And I think this is where we are kind of sort of with the automotive people bringing in tech guys. So that's where I'm thinking it's come full circle. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Joe will probably remember this, but just to sort of, underline that early phase, it absolutely looked like this thing was going to be a spectacular failure. And in fact, it was. They were out of money at the end of 2008. And I can remember, Joe, I don't know if you remember the 2009 Detroit Auto Show. Elon was there.
Yeah.
And they were spiraling out of control. They had no money. They had just
the whole industry was.
And they had just closed their Michigan engineering, because they used to have a Michigan unit. A couple hundred people, you were talking about auto people. They actually did have that in the Detroit area. They had just shut that down. They're completely broke. And it was, I think at that point, the expectation was, we knew this was going to happen. These guys don't know what they're doing. They're going to lose all this money. And that almost happened. And I was sitting with Elon at the RenCen in Detroit, interviewing him. He's very gloomy when he gets a text message and he says, I got to take this. I'll be right back in about 30 minutes. That text message he got was from Daimler, and they were committing to an initial order of battery packs and motors for a pilot EV project in Germany. That moment was when everything suddenly began to change. And so the thing about Tesla was an extraordinary amount of luck that just happened in that early phase. Daimler, and then of course Toyota coming in and giving them NUMMI as a gift, which was
giving them.
Well, yeah, I mean, how do you want to call it? They sold it to him
basically
$40 million.
No, I want to stress that it's giving them because
that's right.
They got
a multi
and not all, but a lot of equipment.
It had a new paint, a relatively new paint shop.
Expensive stuff, paint shop, all that. Anyway, go ahead.
That's right. Yeah. But Toyota, to its credit, that thing was a white elephant because they had shut it down. NUMMI was closed. GM was in, they filed for bankruptcy. NUMMI was over. Toyota said, we got to pull out. This only exists as a joint venture plant. So it's sitting there empty. The city of Fremont wants to turn it into a shopping mall. I mean, it's almost gone.
It's massive. Fremont Giga is massive.
Big plant. But Akio Toyota, I got to hand it to him. It's like, it was one of the savviest things, and Toyota made a killing on it. They unloaded a useless asset. Tesla turned it around, but they invested $50 million in Tesla. That was sort of how it worked. They sold the plant to Tesla for $40 million and then $10 million in miscellaneous stamping equipment and other things. In exchange, they invested $50 million in Tesla. So, I mean, that sounds like a gift to me. It's just like a trade.
It's a gift.
But they made billions on that $50 million investment. Both Toyota and Daimler made out handsomely in their early Tesla investments. So, the ridiculous part is they should have held on a bit longer, because they would have quadrupled.
They could have made even more.
But
I remember watching that. They could have made even more. But both of them at some point concluded, and I do want to come to the present day, but they both concluded, look, wait a minute, we're enabling a competitor. And for that, on that point, they were absolutely correct. They're absolutely enabling a competitor. I don't think they may be, I think they may be underestimated.
But what I would say, to take things to where they are today, it actually goes back to the beginning, because one of the secrets of Tesla, the secret sauce that has been consistent from the very beginning to today, is the battery and their approach to doing an EV battery. It seemed laughable when I sat down with Martin Eberhard and he's explaining their approach. We're going to use 11,000 individual laptop cells, hook them all into a big giant battery pack, and that's how we're going to solve this. And it's like, that's insane. And Detroit felt that way, and every automaker felt that way. It's like, no, you need a breakthrough chemistry, a big cell, not 11,000 little battery cells, laptop cells is 11,000 failure points. So there was this idea that you've got to use less components. And the remarkable thing is, they were right. I mean, Martin came out of the hard disk drive industry, and he said, on your computer, do you know how many times you have failures in your hard drive? And I said, I don't know. I don't think I ever do. And he's like, almost constantly, but you're not aware of it because there's so much bandwidth in your hard drive that even small failures you're not aware of. And he had that mentality. So that idea, that was not Elon's idea. That came from Martin and the original guys. So anyway, they start with the battery.
And it still stands to this day.
And that's the whole thing. The industry
cars
picked up on that, and that became the industry standard. So that's very interesting. If we fast forward to today, we run through everything. Model S.
Actually, Alan, let me stop you there, because I would love for you to detail a little bit about California's subsidies and how that came about a little bit, and how that helped Tesla in the early time frame for them.
Sure. I mean, basically because, California forever has had its own emissions rules, and then created this zero emission vehicle program, which the Trump administration currently is trying to eliminate that authority. But it was requiring all automakers to meet much, much tougher tailpipe emissions rules. And the only way you do that is with hybrids or EVs at the time. Tesla got gifts from California in the form of certainly manufacturing tax credits and things like that for investing in the state. But the real money came from these ZEV credits. The ability to sell, it's the Dire Straits song, Money for Nothing. That's literally what it was. Tesla makes EVs. EVs have no emissions. General Motors, Honda, Daimler, everybody else has vehicles that put out tailpipe pollution. To offset that, you buy credits. And Tesla was the only company selling. And so they began this revenue stream. Their first reported revenue of EV tax credits begins in about 2009. And it's a minor amount in those first years because it's not selling a lot. But of course, that just escalated.
So they technically became a tier one to the
huge
legacy OEMs.
Yeah.
Well, I'd put it another way. And I'd put it another way. They got the legacy OEMs to subsidize their growth.
That's right.
I mean, and to this day, I just looked at this morning before we got on. Last year, and I think last year was not the peak year for this, but it was last year they took in just under $2 billion in credit revenue, and that's almost pure profit, right? I mean, I suppose there's a certain amount of accounting overhead or something that gets absorbed by that. But that's about it, right? It's essentially pure profit.
Yeah.
So anyway,
And of course that was very helpful, but it's gone now, or it's going away.
Do we want to move on?
The crazy thing is, when in China that happens, they call it a socialist policy, but for Tesla, it's not a socialist policy for some reason.
Come on, man! It's pure capitalism. It's all good. If you want, I'm interested. There's another by the way, I know a lot of people sort of say, oh, they get all this money from credits, and that's absolutely true. On the other hand, I always felt like, look, that's part of their business model. And Alan, you just kind of explained it. That's part of the business model. It's no different from GM making money on spare parts. It's part of the business model. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
The problem is that's going away, or a lot of that revenue is going to be going away. I don't know exactly how much. You might find out for Q1. But there's another, and this is what I wanted Alan to come to a little bit. They've got a couple of other businesses or hidden inside of Tesla that seem like they may be turning into, ultimately, a much more, prominent part of the business as the electric car business declines, right? And one of those is batteries and energy storage. And I remember when they first started talking about, kind of putting battery farms around to store energy. And I thought, this is a complete sideline designed to soak up excess battery capacity. I don't have to worry about paying attention to this or understanding how the business works. But you've persuaded me that I'm wrong about that. So explain what they're up to there, because it does seem like Tesla is really starting to become something different from just an EV company. So yeah, talk about this battery thing, and then we can maybe branch out to some other stuff too.
Well, yeah, I think that the battery thing, if you've been looking at their financial filings in recent years, energy business for them just keeps going up and up and up. And it's still small relative to the car business, but it's the one true bright spot in their earnings report. As you point out, EV sales are in decline. They've been down 2 years back to back. They will be down again this year. Elon's interest in making EVs clearly seems to be on the wane. He wants to sell you robots and robotaxis, and neither of which,
or the promise of,
because neither are actual revenue generating businesses. And that's the whole point. To me, it's like, we should all be Missouri. Show me, don't tell me. Like once it's
I like the way, Alan, I like the way you put it in your recent piece, Optimus cosplay. But go on. We're derailing you. Come on back.
I'm not a very bright person. I'm kind of simple. So I just look at what's the stuff that actually makes money. And cars have been a terrific business for them. That business is in decline. And then you look, at the different operation. It's like, oh, this is interesting. And batteries have become a huge business. A decade ago, they rolled out the Powerwall. This was for rich people with solar roofs. And here you can store your own energy. Isn't this quaint? And charge your car up. And it started out as kind of a small thing. A couple of years later, they come out with these mega packs, and the mega packs are now for much larger, like solar farms and wind farms and things like that, utility scale. The problem at that point is they're still using lithium ion battery cells primarily. And the problem with those, of course, as we know with cars, is if they overheat, it's a real problem. It's a fire you can't put out. Yeah. So the big shift has been, towards LFP, China-based cell technology that's going into the mega pack. So CATL, I think, is still their primary supplier at this point. But that business,
and they sell the mega packs in China too.
They do.
They have a local factory on the campus of Shanghai Giga.
Yeah. That's right. They make them in Lathrop, California, and in Shanghai. But that mega pack is so in demand at this point. Again, from utilities, data centers, batteries. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I talked to Jigar Shah, who used to run the energy department's loan program. And Jigar was saying right now, it's like, don't think of batteries just as this add-on for renewable power. Like to solve our energy problems, our grid problems right now, it's like batteries everywhere for everything. So a gas plant, a coal plant, a nuclear power plant, it's that ability to store, because what you want to do is shave
your home.
But you want to shave the peaks, right? It's like you want to eliminate peaks in the grid. And he said there's actually enough power being generated by the grid as it is. The problem is it's very, it's up and down like this. Batteries allows for smoothing of energy disbursement. And so there is this across the board demand. Everybody wants batteries, batteries, batteries. The US, of course, right now puts pretty high tariffs on imported Chinese anodes and cathodes. And so that makes it a problem. We don't have a soup to nuts battery manufacturing base in the United States. Even so,
specifically on the LFP side.
On the LFP, because LFP right now, there are other chemistries coming that are very encouraging for long duration storage for these battery energy systems. But LFP is kind of like the best we have right now, and it works terrific in that application. And it doesn't burn. It has much lower risk of thermal incident, which, that's
and
a
there's
good thing.
A lot of capacity for LFP,
and
mostly in China,
really where
there's a lot of
Tesla
capacity.
has pivoted into that. We've seen Ford is doing the same thing, right? Ford is converting its battery plant, also with CATL partnership, to do battery storage systems. We're waiting to see, General Motors immediately announced big cuts to its battery team. objectively, it's like, why would you do that? That's nuts. There is so much demand for batteries. It's like, okay, they're not going to go into electric cars, but you can put these into stationary packs and sell everything you can make. So I suspect that's coming for General Motors. That really seemed like some of these immediate moves by the OEMs in like slashing their battery operations is like, don't do that. That's really not smart.
So go ahead too. I'm sorry.
Really quickly, another use case is that we're in a war right now, the United States, unfortunately. And so they're thinking of, Department of War is thinking of using batteries on vehicles, on boats as portable grids so that they can power their fleets or their troops or whatever. And so there's multiple use cases for these BESS, battery energy storage systems.
Yeah.
And I think what's really important to note is that they don't need to be automotive grade.
That's right.
Because on a vehicle, you need to really, really be bulletproof. And so on a BESS, it can be, I want to say like 2/3 qualifications of an automotive grade battery, because automotive grade is final frontier, and that's really, really tough.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons the Japanese and the Koreans on the LFP side are still having challenges going to mass production on these things.
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing because I can remember, again, going back to one of the Detroit auto shows, maybe 2009 or 10, Wang Chuanfu from BYD was there with their original EV. And we all kind of laughed when we saw the thing because the design wasn't great, but it was that LFP battery that it had, which weighed, it was so heavy. The range was crap. It was like nothing. And it's like, this thing is ridiculous. And LFP seemed like a dead end, just like Tesla's idea of we're going to use 11,000 individual laptop cells. And everybody's like, that'll never work. So my crystal ball is not always that great.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough to have a crystal ball. Alan, let me ask you. We were talking about the connection to China. Does Tesla have at this point sort of a full circle battery supply chain within the United States? I mean, I know Elon talks about capacity and lithium refining and all this stuff. But where is he at really, or is he still pretty dependent on China for
in China
this business?
They do, they participate in the China supply base for batteries, so they're fine at Shanghai. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is they've just opened a lithium refinery in Texas, so they now have one of the first dedicated lithium refineries. Because that's the other thing; it's not just having the raw material, all of the processing runs through China. So, your cobalt and your nickel and all of the different materials, lithium, everything traditionally has been flowing through China because China prioritized building up this supply base. We didn't. And we were happy to let someone else do it because, it's a chemical plant. So there are environmental issues related to that. It's not lovely. So in answer to your question, no, he's not set up today to do everything. He can do a lot of it, but they are using imported anode cathode materials from Chinese suppliers, from CATL. And so those are coming in with this higher tariff applied. It's like at least 75%, maybe more. But even with that markup, it seems like it still works. And I've talked to some other companies that are using imported Chinese materials, and they're like, yeah, we're eating the tariff, but it's like, we can do it. So it's not a deal breaker. I don't know if we're going to ever be properly set up to do LFP, all of it from A to Z domestically. And the issue is there are interesting new competing technologies coming up, like sodium, iron, not for automotive. These are, again, for
Lamar.
Yeah. I think General Motors has that new.
Yeah, they've talked about, GM has definitely talked about that.
And Ford.
Well,
as two things, Alan. I think we don't have the time to really build out complete LFP capacity and refining and mining. And then I don't think we have the capital. Okay. So there needs to be around the corner, GM and Ford or whoever on the Western legacy side pulling in a new chemistry or some breakthrough. Now, it doesn't help that BYD just launched a mega charger that can charge in 10 minutes 80%.
Yeah.
So we're cycles behind.
Oh, yeah.
The Western legacy automakers are at least a couple technological cycles behind their Chinese counterparts, which makes it really, really, really difficult.
Yeah, but is Tesla that far behind? I guess is another question to look at. Are they,
Tesla is the leader in, for battery storage deliveries. I mean, they're like the biggest player in the market because they're the closest thing we have to a legacy player. The issue with them has more to do again with sourcing, the entire sourcing of the supply chain for something like an LFP chemistry. They do have to work with CATL to get imported materials. I mean, perhaps at some point CATL or BYD gets permission to do an entirely US based battery operation. I mean, with the Trump administration, it's hard to say whether they'll allow that or not. But that would be, I think, and that's CATL in particular. I said we'll set up a full operating base in the United States. We can do that, and it's just up to whether the administration allows it or not. But I think your point is exactly right too. That we don't have the time and the money to try to build up something to rival China. The idea is probably we need to think about what's the next chemistry and then really dig in on that one that could be both for stationary storage and for automotive application.
Yeah, no, that it's challenging though, right? Because and I think about this a lot. I mean, and again, Tesla maybe is the best positioned Western company or Western based company for this. But the problem I see is that, the Chinese companies, the best of them, right? BYD and then CATL and the best of them. This is a Kaizen kind of a business, right? I mean, you iterate, you have capability and technology, and then you improve and improve and improve and improve. And until they're 15, 20 years or more ahead of anybody out, even I think they're ahead of the Koreans and the Japanese, certainly ahead of the United States in kind of doing that, right? I mean, and it seems it's not the moonshot approach, at least in the auto sector, moonshots have a mixed track record at best. I mean, Tesla was a moonshot, it worked. Saturn was a moonshot for GM, for those of you with super long memories. And we all know what happened with Saturn. It didn't work. I worry about Ford's UEV, ultra efficient, whatever they call it, their Skunk Works EV project out in California. That's another moonshot, and it might well be very successful, but will it transform all of Ford back in Dearborn? I don't know.
Well, go ahead. So let me stop you there. Let me stop you guys there. Let me get both of your expert opinions on, does Tesla not happen in Detroit? Because GM has the Mountain View office now, with all its connected and a lot of its Super Cruise team out there. Ford had to open a Long Beach office. Okay. Is it that Detroit can't do a technologically advanced electric vehicle in Detroit? I mean, this is more philosophical, but does Tesla not happen in Detroit? Because that's the thing.
Well, you're talking about like a replica of the Tesla experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, question is, what's the Tesla experience, right? What is the Tesla story now?
That's the whole thing. To your point, I really would question, Tesla remains in the US a monster of the EV market. I mean, it's like them and everybody else is a rounding error. But, last year, for example, we saw General Motors doing some really interesting things. The Equinox is a very attractive, very capable, competent, affordable EV in a good space, in the compact SUV space. They need more of that. And the problem we see in the US EV market, and with Detroit in particular, is they think, I got to recover all my costs immediately, so I'm going to make a $100,000 luxury thing. And the US market does not need any more $90,000 jumbo SUVs, pickups, or ultra luxe EVs. It's like that market is so small. There's
and well served.
And well served. That's right. And we'll see what happens with the new Bolt, which has come back, which is like sort of new. It's like, it feels weird because it's like, it looks a hell of a lot like the previous Bolt that just went away, the EUV. And
it's using CATL imported batteries.
Using CATL, again, here comes CATL again. That's right. But, General Motors on some levels has been very disappointing because they were very aggressive for a period of time. And then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. And that seems incredibly short-sighted because one of the things we've been talking about here is we're ceding the future of the auto industry to China. We've done so at this point. The U.S. is going to become a niche market. The world is not buying pickup trucks and giant SUVs. The United States is like the sole good market for that. And for, Detroit and Ford and Stellantis to just kind of roll over and hunker down in their shells and like, we're just going to keep selling these things. It's like, that seems really dangerous, over the long term.
And now that we're in a war and they've written off tens of billions of dollars, each of them, because they want to rewrite their business strategy, now there's an opportunity for EV demand to increase again.
Well, I do a newsletter for Forbes as well called Current Climate. And that's actually one of the points I make in the opening segment, which is forget about the climate element of driving an electric car. Set that aside for a moment. There's an energy security issue. There's a national security issue. If you have an EV produced in the United States, powered up by a renewable grid, what do you care what the price of gasoline is? It just doesn't matter. And China right now, I was reading something that, China's imports of oil have actually, declined pretty dramatically. China's still burning a lot of coal because that's all it's got as a domestic energy resource. But it is because EVs are now more than 50% of new vehicle sales there and rising, and it is cleaning up its grid with solar and wind and battery storage. China is insulating itself from some of these geopolitical swings in energy prices. And it's unfortunate that in the rush by the Trump administration to eviscerate the Inflation Reduction Act and roll back EV credits and all of these things, it's like, are you sure you want to do that? Because you're getting rid of a domestic, secure energy supply or transportation option that is not dependent on the price of a barrel of oil.
Well, then that's the confusing thing to me, Alan, a little bit, because the U.S. government, our government, seems a bit schizophrenic on where we're going to stand in the future with energy policy. And we know that if we want to be independent of China, we need to be writing big checks and letting our policies be consistent across administrations. And unless that happens, both of them need to happen. We're always going to have China in our supply chain. And so we seem to be talking out of both sides of our mouth a little bit. It's if I'm in Auburn Hills, Detroit, or Dearborn, I'm pulling my hair out because you just took away all the incentives for me to build EVs, and now you start a war that could potentially increase the cost of gas by $1, $1.50.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do if I'm a CEO at one of these legacy automakers.
Well, I want to go back to the point you raised earlier. Can Detroit create a Tesla? Absolutely. There's no reason why it can't. It remains the center of the U.S. auto industry. So the engineers are there, manufacturing capability is there. And we were beginning to see some growth signs. I mean, some misfires. I mean, the 50 Lightning was kind of a cool idea. I'm not sure it was properly thought through. I think, if you need to tow stuff, a battery-powered pickup at this point is probably not your best option. But, there was the Mustang Mach-E did quite well. But there is the capability. And I think, I don't know whether the Ford, you mentioned the Ford project, for example, for their next generation EV. I don't know if that will ultimately be successful, but I think the way they've structured it is logical, where they have these, two different teams. And I think it is important that they have people, a unit in California, because California is a different market right now. California is some years ahead of the rest of the country in terms of EV adoption, for example. We're at like 20+%, which globally isn't that high compared to Norway or China, but it's much higher than most of the other country. And so California in that sense is a test market. It's an early market, and it's a big market because, 10 to 12 million vehicles, or I'm sorry, 2 to 2.5 million vehicles are sold in California each year. So it's a big chunk of the national market. So it's a good enough place to begin dropping products and see what works. It's got a little bit more charging infrastructure, so it's a little more viable. I think Ford's idea, I think, is not bad. I think the Doug Fields project. I don't know if that's ultimately going to work, but I think that idea is correct. And it seems like Xiaomi put the fear of God into Jim Farley, and
well, So, Alan, the other thing I would say, and you may have already said this, if you're talking about the Ford Skunk Works, the other thing is California is the talent center. If you're trying to do a software-defined vehicle and an electric vehicle, and you're trying to steal, engineers from Tesla and engineers from other adjacent, skill sets, so I think the kind of the operating head of that project, Alan Clark, I think his name is Alan Clark. He's a Tesla person. I think he's from California. I don't know him at all, but I'm just going to imagine
he
that
was
his
part of
life
the
outside.
Cybertruck team at Tesla.
Oh, well, there you go. But I mean, his life outside of Tesla probably involves living in California and having friends in California, and and all the rest of the stuff and so I think that's part of it too. Although all the things you said about the market are absolutely right. So yeah, I mean, look, I mean, the only reason I was skeptical of that, and it was a long time ago, given I think the wind took out my internet, so there's a whole nother discussion.
Yes.
I need a mega pack outside my house.
Starlink. You need Starlink.
Yeah, I need Starlink. But my skepticism about, and maybe too, my thoughts about the question you asked way back when. I mean, can a Tesla happen in Detroit? I mean, sure it could, but it would, and in a way, Rivian kind of sorta is that. I mean, they have their roots in Detroit, although they've moved a lot of their operations to California now. Um, you know, but I think that a lot more people than Jim Farley are going to need to have the fear of God put into them by BYD and Xiaomi. I mean, just as happened well, you both know this story, and it's one where I came in. In the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s, when it became clear that Toyota was succeeding, not because they had a yen advantage, although they kind of did, or not because of cheap labor in Japan, because that wasn't really the problem. It was they were better because they were better.
Yeah.
They had a much more efficient way of operating, a much more efficient way of developing product. And once that finally sunk in and the Detroit companies began to adapt those ideas to their own operations, that's when things started to work. And I think the same thing will have to, and I hear it in Detroit. I mean, too, you probably hear it too. I mean, these senior executives have been over to China since the pandemic and realized how quickly Chinese companies are iterating and developing new product or improving product, and the way they handle technology, all this stuff, they're getting the message. It's just how quickly can they get traditional organizations to adopt it.
What I'm hearing more and more is that, senior management is getting it. Let's admit that they were very slow to get it, or at least acknowledge it openly to the West. Okay, because Mary knew what was going on in China. Jim kind of knew what was going on in China, because especially in Jim's case, Lawler was in China for a while. His chairman. So is the UAV the answer? Because the Equinox, the Bolt, great products for GM, would have been even better with a $7,500 subsidy or a smaller subsidy on the Bolt. How much do they want to bet on these two products to push through? Because let's say in 28, 29, and 30, more and more affordable electric vehicles are going to enter the market, the R2, the Baby Gravity, the Slate. And then I want to point back to the FSD, because you had mentioned, the UAV team is a good thing for Ford. They both announced, GM and Ford announced, by 2028, they're going to have level 3. Okay. So let's circle back to the FSD, because that's really the only thing that keeps at least many Tesla buyers buying Teslas, because FSD is clearly superior from an intelligent driving system. Now, they're crossing lines that I don't think they should be crossing from a policy standpoint. They're playing in shades of gray, which I think the policymakers need to really acknowledge. But can FSD, or let me put it another way, can Super Cruise and Blue Cruise be as good as FSD within the next 3 to 5 years?
Absolutely. No question. I'm not as bullish on FSD as you are. And the challenge is, because of the misleading timelines and statements that have been made about that for years. Again, it's like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. How many times do we want to keep, there's what Elon says and there's the reality on the ground. And FSD is a flawed system. Now they at least say FSD supervised, meaning you have to pay attention. So it's kind of like calorie free has calories. I don't really understand that. Full self-driving, not exactly.
Yeah, I call it fake self-driving, and I don't apologize for that anymore. I mean it. It's a fun joke, but it's also true. So it's fake self-driving.
You are right. FSD functionally does more than Super Cruise or Blue Cruise or something like that. And that's because the company seems to have been very comfortable being riskier in certain things.
Going whole hog from day one.
From day one. And again, the fact that you're doing it with just 8 low res cameras is not comforting at all. It's even if you just used better cameras, it would be a better system. One group was testing out a previous iteration up until like last year, the hardware 3 set, and it had what was legally vision that would not even pass the California like eye exam, because they were doing it. They were lining the car up and looking at an eye chart and to see what was the resolution from the Tesla system. And it came out like 2060 or something. I mean, it was like, so legally it wasn't even good enough.
It's like Mr. Magoo, for God's sake.
Yeah. It's, Gen 4, I guess, is slightly better. But the reason they use low grade cameras is Elon. He just doesn't want to spend any money on proper hardware. That's why he got rid of radar, and it's why he doesn't want to ever go to LiDAR, he says. But the reality is, those additional sensors give you better safety, better performance. I mean, the FSD system today, if you were driving in Austin, for example, it doesn't stop at railroad crossings that come down. We've seen, there was a video last week of somebody showing this happening. That to me is not a safe system. If you're on the highway with FSD and you're staying in your lane, great. It's you can go hands-free, no problem. And that's the whole thing. It's like just the overselling of the capability is what troubles me a great deal. And I think, traditionally we've seen the mainline automakers have been much more circumspect about their claims of what
they've
can and can't do. They've been sued so many times.
Yeah, I was going to say, Alan, you just took the words out of my mouth, which is fine. For 60 years, or more, but certainly since Ralph Nader, they have been, they're in court. And as GM experienced with the ignition switch scandal it's 12, 13 years ago now. I mean, some of this stuff can be really, really, really financially and reputationally damaging, like not just a minor annoyance that you write off. Yeah. I mean, I wonder, and maybe we kind of, we circle for the landing here. Alan, I'd be interested. I mean, you've written a bunch about Tesla and kind of the evolution of the company. We just talked about, FSD was going to be kind of the business of the future, or cybercab, or this or that. I mean, and I know that betting on where Tesla is going to be is a rough game and fraught game to play. But if you kind of had to bet, if you put the pieces together of what you've seen, what does Tesla look like in 2 or 3 years?
Well, my approach to writing about Tesla, before I was at Bloomberg, I spent 5 years in equity research departments. I wasn't an analyst. I basically was often ghostwriting equity research reports for Japanese analysts in Tokyo. But 5 years in equity research. So when I think about as a reporter, I want to cover a company like I think an analyst should. And if you're a business reporter, I want to look at what makes money, what works, what doesn't work. And so I really try to filter out what Elon says, because 20 years, it's like, what do they do? It's not what he says on an earnings call. It's what actually happens. Again, this is why with FSD, I'm a little more skeptical. Tesla's in a weird position right now because Elon clearly, objectively, has lost interest in the car business. Like, he just doesn't care. I think at some point he had a come to Jesus moment, and whether it was BYD or Xiaomi or the Chinese industry realizing, oh my God, we can't match this. And so he begins this pivot. We're going to be a Robotaxi company. We're an AI company. We're going to make, humanoid robots. And he's talking about all these other things. Chips.
Yeah, now they're making a terafab. Yeah.
We talked about batteries and how big that is. I think Tesla's battery business is just going to keep growing. He did say on the call that they're going to do 100. They want to scale up to be able to produce 100 gigawatts a year of solar panels, which is incredible. Like that's huge. They have the Buffalo Gigafactory now, which used to be the Solar City plant, which was supposed to be a solar panel plant and never really was. Panasonic was doing all the work for them, and then it stopped making them, it seems, altogether. Tesla has remained in the solar panel business, but not making them, just installing them and then giving you a battery. I think his pivot to solar is really smart. I think it's like, yeah, do that. And if they have smart people working on that technology, maybe they can come up with a high-powered, efficient, affordable solar panel. go for it. That's a great business. But reaching 100 gigawatts of solar is a multi-year thing. That, they're not scaled. I think there was a report I saw that the goal at Buffalo this year is to be able to produce 300 megawatts of panels. 300 megawatts is, a tiny.
That's like Elon saying we're going to build 20 million cars a year.
Exactly. Yeah. But the fact that if he's going to push into that market, I can't fault him for that. It's like that makes sense. There's demand. Energy is a great business right now. So that looks good. So I think Tesla's energy business will keep growing. I think 2 to 3 years from now, maybe they have a Robotaxi unit. I mean, that is so difficult to predict because, he's been saying it for so long. It's waiting for Godot. It's like, when does it arrive? And there's no indication. He said, well, by the end of the year, we're going to be in all these markets unless there are regulatory issues. It's like, your tech is not ready. Like, you're just not ready. Waymo is light years more sophisticated, and even Waymo struggles with some things. So business is hard to predict. Will they be selling humanoid robots? I can't begin to guess on that one. I mean, that I have no idea. But I see continued shrinkage in the car business, growth in the energy business, and all the other stuff is like a jump ball. Like, it's really hard to say.
Yeah, but they're still worth. Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say they're still worth They're still worth well over $1 trillion. So the three of us are struggling to kind of figure it out. Somebody on Wall Street, or a number of people on Wall Street, still believe
that's the Elon factor. And, I mean, it's the ultimate.
Yeah,
meme
and that's
stock,
the Elon. Yeah, it is the ultimate meme stock. I feel pretty much the same way. I do think it'll be interesting to see if once the SpaceX plus XAI combination goes off, and assuming that a SpaceX IPO happens, at some point, then Elon has a currency in the form of SpaceX stock. And now he has SpaceX stock and Tesla stock, and you can put a value on those things, and then you can combine them and just kind of whip the whole thing into a giant souffle. And then, I don't know. It just seems like it's always dynamic with Elon. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
That's a very accurate statement.
I do want to double click on what you had said earlier, Alan, about Elon saw that he couldn't match what was happening in China and said, even if I build a Model 2, it'll need to be a decontented Model 3 with about 6 to 12 inches chopped off of it. And I can't compete. So he saw that. I don't know why his analysts don't see that. Number one. Number two, the challenges with Waymo, for instance, because he beat the legacies to the EV game, full stop. That's why it's $1.5 trillion versus $80 billion for General Motors. But when you get into robotaxis, Alphabet is a $4 trillion company. At $1.5 trillion, your guns don't match Alphabet's or Waymo's. Now, Waymo's going to IPO, and I get that $40, $50, $60 billion, but they're still going to have daddy warbucks to pad their stats a little bit. And so I think that's where the challenge is. And then if we get into the robots, he needs the United States to isolate itself from the Chinese supply chain. That's how he wins with robots. Okay? That's how he's won with SpaceX as well. But, in order to build that competency of humanoids, he's probably going to have to start using Chinese components. Motors and things like that. And so that's the interesting part, because I don't know, unless he's nurturing a bunch of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 level suppliers to help on the component side. Let's say Optimus is a terrific humanoid. Is he going to also vertically integrate on all the components? Because that gets really expensive and time consuming. And he's not.
I want to grab one of the threads you mentioned here, and this is another, I think, key point. And this is where I will say, I roll my eyes when I read some of the, with the Tesla bulls, the equity analysts, the assumptions that they make that, frankly, are not defensible. It's like, I'm sorry, what are you basing that
defensible
on? There was a recent one by Bank of America, and he said Tesla is the flat out leader in autonomous driving. It's like, I'm sorry, what, where are you getting that? Like, please, are you talking to Missy Cummings? Are you talking to actual researchers in the field who know that?
Have you gotten in an autonomous vehicle?
Have you ridden it with? That's right. Here's a point I want to make. And to Joe's point, even with all the issues, Tesla's still worth $1 trillion. and that is the Elon factor. I mean, he has this like juice that really like keeps the stock high. I am convinced there is such an overestimation of the value of its robotaxi business. I will, for argument's sake, I will say they could do it. Let's say next year they have a robotaxi business. Here's the problem. When Tesla started out in EVs, it was the only game in town. It had an incredible competitive moat because nobody could match it. And when the Model S came out in 2012, it's like, oh my God, this is from the future. It was such a leapfrog. There is no comparison to that in autonomous driving. Waymo today is the industry leader in the tech, full stop. They just are. Tesla is trying to match Waymo, but at the same time, we have a dozen companies that are moving fast. Wabi, Wave, Motional, Zoox. There is so much competition in that space that Tesla will have no ability to control pricing. So Robotaxi rides, right now, Waymo competes with Uber at about the same price. If you factor in the tip, the Waymo ride is about, the same price. 5 years from now, it's going to be less. 10 years from now, it's going to be less. So the robotaxi business is going to be incredibly low margin. It's not going to be, So the idea that it's going to be this endless source of trillions of dollars of new profit is just not.
Yeah. And this is no, Alan, I agree with you. And by the way, we could do a whole nother podcast on this because we're coming to almost an hour on this one, but maybe we should have you back to do this because everything you've just said, I agree with. And I've also watched within the last 6 months or maybe a year to 6 months, and even in the last 2 months, you see Uber stepping in now and basically gather, it's the Sauron of driverless cars, the One Ring.
One Ring, yeah.
They have the network of riders, and they're bringing them all under to Mordor. Come on in. Deal after deal after deal after deal.
Over AV partnerships. It's remarkable.
So that's another podcast. We'll come back to that.
Over 160 million users of Uber globally.
Yeah, and so yeah, and like I said, we should do a whole podcast on that because I've been watching that and they've been accelerating. But I agree your point about FSD and Cybercab being some sort of massive gusher of money. Alan, I agree with you. I don't see that, and yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to watch. I don't see that happening. I think it's the opposite.
Let me close this out because I have to double click on what you said about robotaxis, Alan. First of all, let's say Tesla has over 2 million units of capacity globally for production of vehicles.
2.5, actually.
Yeah, I'm being kind.
It's using far less than that.
Yeah.
Yes. And so over a million units of production are in China. Okay. So it lives and dies from a production capacity standpoint and sales standpoint from Shanghai Giga. They will not have that market the way they do in robotaxis. They don't have full FSD launched in China. And to your point, Alan, there's already competitors that are not afraid of going lower than them in that local market. So to your point again, Alan, what are these analysts analyzing? How much of the China market are they valuing within this enterprise value that they're saying Tesla is worth? Because that tells, and I've never met any of these analysts when I was living in China or whenever I'm back. So I've never seen them in the China market. So let's assume that they have a spreadsheet that tells them how much the China market is worth, but they've never actually seen it themselves. And so that's kind of the crazy thing to me, because where we give Elon the benefit of the doubt, he privatized space exploration. That's nuts. To think about that alone is nuts. He revolutionized electric vehicles. So, okay, let's be bullish on his capabilities. All right. But we run into realities that these analysts are not acknowledging. And I think that's kind of the challenge that I have with where we are about the conversation on Tesla over the next few years, next several years.
Yeah.
So
that's you're exactly right. Yeah.
Joe, you want to close this out?
Yeah. Alan, thanks so much for your time. This is a great conversation. And as we said, we got to have you back. There's a lot of areas you cover. You cover a rich and fertile and very dynamic field, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to go.
We didn't even talk about his his schizophrenic mind on SpaceX and XAI and how it's same pair of pants, different pockets that he's helping fund all these companies of his, right?
Yeah, no, like I said, we could do like a whole series. We could do a whole series. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching, I guess. And we are now, thanks to Tu's tireless efforts, this podcast will be up on YouTube and on the Apple platform, right? Among others.
Yes.
Too.
Yes.
Yeah. So
audio podcast.
We're going to be a lot easier for you to find, and hope you'll join us again. We do this again in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Alan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Great to be with you.
See you guys.